Hey guys, Tom Barclay here, outside Tottenham Hotspur Stadium with some of the last remaining fans hoping to get an autograph or a selfie with Spurs players. We've just done an Ange Postecoglou's press conference. I'm going to just slowly walk back to the train station. So let's talk about Ange Postecoglou's pre-Coventry City Carabao Cup press conference. Some really interesting lines. Quite a lot is in the embargo section, which I won't talk about here. I have to read about that later, but quite a lot of it that came up in that section was a sort of elaboration of this bit that I'll start off with. It was right at the end of the press conference, talking about that interview on Sky after the North London derby, in which he very sort of boldly claimed that or reiterated the point that after every second season at a previous club or country that he's managed, he does win a trophy. And that obviously grabbed quite a lot of attention on social media. I certainly wrote about that in the newspaper. I was in his press conference. I'd written everything from that press conference, the best lines from that, talking about set pieces. And as I was on my way home, I got a call from the office saying, "Have you seen this interview that he's given Sky?" Which I hadn't, because I was in the press conference waiting for Ange, and also was writing a colour piece on Dominic Solanke. And then once I got those quotes, that became the new focus of it, because it was interesting. And he was asked about it. Like I say, quite a lot in the embargo section, so I can't talk about that bit. But in the towards the end of the open section, and he said he was kind of confused by what a big deal people have been making of those particular comments. And he said he felt like he was just saying something that was true. If you remember this particular exchange, he was I think it was put to him that he normally wins something, a trophy or a title in his second year. And he pointed out that he always does. He obviously did it in quite a forthright fashion. And he was saying he wasn't boasting. It wasn't a boast. It was just him sort of clarifying what he's done. And he said that if it doesn't happen next year, he'll have to say he wins mostly a trophy in the second season, not always. Which was interesting. Like I say, there was more on this in the embargo section, but I found it fascinating. It was sort of, for me, it kind of added extra pressure on him to deliver, but I get the sense that he's fine with that. And particularly, I suppose, after a kind of difficult to swallow defeat against Arsenal, perhaps it kind of gave a bit of a different narrative to focus on rather than the team. But yeah, that was a very interesting point that he made in this press conference. There were many other things that came up. So first of all, from a team news point of view, Yves Bissouma is out. And we had the whole thing the last press conference, whether he was going to make the game before, but he's definitely out of this one and just ruled him out. Says he's not where they want him to be at this stage. And he says he's got a chance for Brentford at the weekend with that groin tweak he picked up on international duty for Mali. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see how long it takes for Yves to come back. He was asked about Cristian Romero. Now, Cristian Romero obviously was at fault for the goal against Arsenal with that Gabriel header, which won Arsenal the game. You'll have seen after the match, he retweeted before later deleting his retweet or undoing it, a suggestion from an prominent Argentine TV reporter that essentially, depending on the translation that you pick up, part of the reason why he might have been tired was because Tottenham didn't lay on a private jet for him coming back from international duty. Now, I wrote about this again on that night after the game when that news came through, or that retweet came through. It suddenly became newsworthy. So essentially, he played on Wednesday for Argentina. Thursday was a day off for the players. Some clubs, so first of all, the federations of the national teams are responsible for organising travel for their players to get back to the countries in which they played domestically. But some clubs do pay for private jets to be laid on to get them back quicker if they so wish. Tottenham generally don't do that, and they felt specifically because Thursday was a day off because the game was on Sunday, obviously the North London derby, they didn't feel like they needed to do that. So he was asked about Romero's sort of situation with his retweeting this, because it could be viewed as a bit of a criticism of the club, him reposting this particular comment. But Ange pretty straight, didn't really give away anything, whether how he felt about it. He just said before the game he was unaware of this situation. Nothing had been mentioned before the game, and when he was pressed on whether Romero was either tired or ill, depending on your translation of that tweet, he again said nothing had been mentioned to him, so he was playing it down. Then he talked a bit about sort of the distances, or he was asked a bit about the distances that players have to travel, with Romero being one, if not the most sort of well-travelled player going, I think last year. That was the suggestion. And he sort of pointed to the fact that, well, that's kind of always been the case, particularly for players who play in far-flung places. Millie Edenak, for example, who's on his coaching staff and was, I think he's captain for Australia, often had to deal with this when playing for Crystal Palace, Aston Villa and all these English sides. So it's nothing new. He did say that, a different conversation is the concerns over the amount of games that players are going to be playing this year or going forward, which is obviously a story that's been big for all teams really, but particularly Chelsea and Manchester City and anyone competing in that Club World Cup next summer, if it does actually go ahead. But yeah, that was pretty much all we said on that one. So no real indication whether if Romero has in any way had any kind of punishment as a result, if it was viewed as a criticism. I'm not aware if that is the case or not, but that was all he pretty much said about that. He was asked briefly about Vicario, because Vicario's come in for some criticism for the goal conceded against Arsenal for not coming out and claiming the ball. Initially it was Romero being shrugged off by Gabriel that was sort of copped the most flack for the goal, but people have also pointed to Vicario, particularly because of the issues he's had in dominating his area and the way teams have been targeting him, pretty much ever since that Manchester City FA Cup game back in January. And Ange didn't really say much about that. He talked about collective responsibility, so he didn't dismiss the idea that Vicario was at fault, but he more pointed towards the whole team. And then finally, sort of moving on to team selection, I guess, going into this massive Carabao Cup game, I think he sort of hinted at quite a few changes that he might make. He talked about players needing games. He specifically mentioned Pape Sarr. He mentioned Odegaard as well. So I think it's quite likely that those two could come in for this game, and the busy schedule coming up. So I know that Marcus Buckland, my good friend and presenter on the Tottenham Way podcast that we do, often gets very frustrated by the idea of Spurs making wholesale changes for cup competitions and not taking them seriously enough, but I do sense that might happen. I would not be surprised if some of the younger players like Archie Gray or Lucas Bergvall got a chance to start this game. And personally, I think it's a bit of a risk making too many changes, particularly at the back, but I get the sense that might happen. Vicario might well keep his place in goal, but then I wouldn't be surprised if Jed Spence comes in for what would be his first competitive game. Whether that be for Porro or whether that be at left back, we'll have to wait and see. But bear in mind, he's out of the Europa League squad. He's got to play in these games if he's going to get any game time, and he's been promised that he'll be played a big role this year. You might see Dragusin come in, probably for Romero, given the amount of minutes he's had, and it looks like he might have been having a bit of a knock in that game. Then Ben Davies might even come in as well for Udogie at left back, so it could be pretty much wholesale changes at the back, barring maybe Van de Ven. Then in midfield, got two reporters behind me who are quite familiar to the Tottenham fan base. Mr. Kilpatrick is our Kinsella, actually more of a Chelsea guy to be fair. I'll let them wander on. Now he's a Spurs guy. To wrap it up, we've got the midfield. It's likely I think that there'll be changes again. Maybe Bentancur might keep his place, Bissouma obviously out of the game. Whether Gray comes in there, Archie Gray, or whether he maybe plays fullback, we'll wait to see. Lucas Bergvall, you think has got a good chance of playing. Pape Sarr, as I mentioned, you'd expect to play given his comments, Ange, about him leading some games. And then up front, I'd be surprised if Solanke wasn't given another chance to sort of build up some fitness, try and get his first goal after missing those couple of games before the international break through injury. So you'd expect him to play. And then Odegaard, you think he might come back in, and maybe even Timo Werner, which I don't know if Spurs fans will think, if that is the team selection, they'll be too happy with, because I know Werner is not exactly everyone's favourite player in the Spurs fan base, but I would not be surprised if that was the team he picked. To me, that if he does go with that, that'd be very risky for what is a huge game, given the patchy form so far, and the fact that, when you stretch it over last season, and the end to that season, it's now 7 defeats and 11 in the league, and just how long it's been since Spurs won a trophy, which we know is absolutely massive for the fan base to finally end that drought, of which he did talk quite a lot about again in the embargo section, as well as a bit of Brennan Johnson, which I think is very interesting. So fans might want to have a watch out for that. But if he does go with that formate, that team, Coventry, they're a team that proved last season in the FA Cup, taking Man United so far to almost knocking them out the semi-final, how dangerous they can be. It sounds like they get a lot of crosses in, particularly in the division, one of the highest in the Championship. So, Dragozin, he's someone who's very competent in the air. He might help Welby and have to sort of use those skills a lot in this particular game. But that pretty much wraps it up in what will be a pretty huge game for Ange going into this League Cup game off the back of a North London derby defeat, and some fans starting to question his tenure. But I plan on doing a video post the game, because I'm going to it tomorrow up at Coventry. So let's see how it goes.